The last transmission from Millbrook came at 3:47 a.m. on October 12, 2019. It wasn't a scream or a plea for help. It was silence. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, that settles in your bones like ice water. One moment, the town of 8,000 souls was there, breathing, living, existing in the valleys of northern Montana. The next moment, it simply stopped. No emergency broadcasts, no frantic 911 calls, no social media posts crying for help. Just a digital flatline that stretched across every communication channel simultaneously. When the first responders finally breached the town limits 72 hours later, they found something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Houses stood perfectly intact, cars parked in driveways, dinner tables set with food that had long since gone cold. But there were no people, not a single body, not a single trace of the 8,000 residents who had called this place home. It was as if an invisible hand had reached down and plucked every living soul from existence, leaving behind only the hollow shells of their lives. The CDC sealed the town within 6 hours. The military established a perimeter within 12, and by the end of the first week, Millbrook had been erased from every map, every GPS system, every official record. The government called it a chemical spill. The news called it a mass evacuation. But the 3 investigators who managed to get inside before the lockdown knew the truth. They had seen the message, spray painted across the wall of the high school gymnasium in what looked like dried blood. "We are the cure." Dr. Sarah Chen had built her career on impossible cases, the kind of medical mysteries that made seasoned epidemiologists wake up screaming in the middle of the night. She'd tracked Ebola through the jungles of West Africa, identified novel strains of influenza in the depths of rural China, and spent 3 months in a hazmat suit studying a flesh-eating bacteria in the Amazon. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for Millbrook. The call came through official channels, a terse message from the CDC's Emergency Operations Center requesting her immediate presence at an undisclosed location in Montana. No details, no briefing documents, just coordinates and a warning to pack for an extended stay. When her helicopter touched down at the makeshift base camp 5 miles outside the town's perimeter, Sarah knew something was catastrophically wrong. The soldiers manning the checkpoints had that look in their eyes, the 1,000-yard stare of men who had seen something that fundamentally broke their understanding of reality. Inside the command tent, she met the only other 2 people who would be allowed past the quarantine line. Marcus Webb was a virologist from Johns Hopkins with a reputation for brilliance and absolutely no social skills. He stood in the corner, obsessively cleaning his glasses, his hands trembling slightly. The man was terrified, and Marcus Webb was not a man who scared easily. The third member of their team was Father Michael Reyes, which made no sense whatsoever. Sarah had expected another scientist, maybe a toxicologist or a biochemical weapons expert. Instead, they'd sent a priest with clearance levels that apparently exceeded her own, based on the deference the military personnel showed him. Before she could ask why a man of the cloth was part of an epidemiological investigation, the commanding officer dropped a sealed file on the table. What she read in the next 10 minutes made her question everything she thought she knew about infectious diseases, human biology, and the very nature of consciousness itself. Now, before we go any deeper into what happened in Millbrook, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching this from. Are you safe in your home right now? Do you know your neighbors? Because after you hear this story, you might start wondering if you really do. The file contained photographs that Sarah's brain struggled to process. The first image showed a woman, approximately 35 years old, standing in what appeared to be her kitchen. She was smiling, caught mid-laugh, her hand raised in a wave. The timestamp read October 11th, 9:32 p.m. The next photograph showed the same kitchen, taken from the same angle, with the same lighting. October 12th, 4:15 a.m. The woman was gone, but her clothes remained, collapsed on the floor in a perfect outline of her body, as if she had simply evaporated from within them. Sarah flipped through dozens of similar images. A man sitting in his car, then just his clothes draped across the driver's seat. A child's bedroom with pajamas laid out on the bed in the exact shape of a sleeping body. A couple embracing in their living room, their garments intertwined on the floor, wedding rings still nestled inside shirt sleeves. It was impossible. People didn't just disappear. There had to be bodies, remains, something biological left behind. But according to the initial reports, the first responders had found nothing. No blood, no tissue, no DNA, just clothes and belongings and an overwhelming silence. Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, revealing that he'd seen something like this once before, or at least heard about it. 3 years ago, in a remote village in Siberia, an entire community had vanished overnight. The Russian government had blamed it on a gas leak, evacuated the surrounding areas, and buried the story under layers of classified documentation. But Marcus had a colleague who'd been part of the initial investigation team before the Kremlin shut everything down. His colleague had described the same phenomenon: clothes outlining absent bodies, no biological remains, and strange symbols painted on walls. The colleague had been institutionalized 6 months later, claiming that the villagers hadn't disappeared at all, that they'd transcended, that they'd found a way to shed their physical forms like snakes shedding skin. Marcus had thought the man had lost his mind, but now, staring at the photographs from Millbrook, he wasn't so sure. Father Reyes cleared his throat and admitted this was why he was there. Because this wasn't just a medical crisis, it was something that touched on matters of faith, consciousness, and perhaps the human soul itself. The Catholic Church had been tracking similar incidents for centuries, small-scale events that they'd documented in their archives, cases of spontaneous disappearances that defied natural explanation. Most were single individuals, occasionally entire families, but nothing on this scale, never an entire town. The priest explained that the church believed these events were connected to something they called the ascension virus, not a biological pathogen in the traditional sense, but something that operated on the border between the physical and metaphysical. It spread like a disease. It infected like a disease, but instead of destroying the body, it transformed consciousness, offering what some interpreted as transcendence and others interpreted as annihilation. Sarah wanted to dismiss it all as religious nonsense, but she couldn't ignore the evidence staring at her from the photographs. She'd spent her entire career studying how viruses hijacked cellular machinery, how they replicated and spread and killed, but a virus that could make human bodies vanish, that operated on consciousness itself. It violated every principle of biology she'd ever learned. Yet here she was, looking at proof that something had happened in Millbrook, something that standard epidemiology couldn't explain. The commanding officer interrupted their discussion with grim news. They had 72 hours to enter the town, collect samples, and determine what had happened before the entire area would be sterilized with a controlled burn that would reduce Millbrook to ash. The decision had already been made at the highest levels of government. Whatever had happened here couldn't be allowed to spread. They would go in at dawn, equipped with hazmat suits, communication devices, and enough supplies for 3 days. They would document everything, collect any biological samples they could find, and try to piece together the final hours of Millbrook's existence. And if they found any survivors, any indication that the residents were still alive somewhere, somehow, they were to report it immediately. As Sarah lay in her temporary bunk that night, unable to sleep, she couldn't stop thinking about those empty clothes arranged in the shapes of bodies, couldn't stop wondering where 8,000 people had gone in the span of a few hours, couldn't stop asking herself the most terrifying question of all. If it was a virus, could it spread to them? The sun hadn't yet crested the mountains when they passed through the final checkpoint. Sarah's hazmat suit felt suffocating despite the filtered air supply, every breath echoing in her ears like a countdown. The military escort stopped at the town limits, forbidden from entering the contaminated zone. From here on, it was just the three of them. Millbrook appeared normal at first glance, almost aggressively so. The main street could have been transplanted from any small American town. A diner with a flickering neon sign, a hardware store with Halloween decorations still in the window, a pharmacy with a "back in 15 minutes" sign hanging in the door. But the silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of their breathing and the crunch of their boots on the pavement. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Even the wind seemed to have abandoned this place. They'd decided to start at the high school, where that blood-red message had been found. The building loomed at the end of Main Street, a brick structure that had probably stood since the 1950s. The front doors were unlocked, hanging slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. Inside, the fluorescent light still hummed, powered by the town's generator. Lockers lined the hallways, some hanging open, their contents spilled across the tile floor. A backpack lay abandoned, textbooks scattered around it. Sarah bent down to examine the books, noting the dates written in teenage handwriting. October 10th, October 11th, the homework assignments of students who would never turn them in. They found the first set of clothes in a classroom on the second floor. A teacher's outfit collapsed behind the desk, reading glasses still perched where a nose should have been. The lesson plan on the whiteboard read, American History, the Spanish Flu of 1918. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Marcus immediately began taking samples, swabbing the fabric, the desk, the air itself. His hands moved with practiced precision, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept glancing at the doorway as if expecting something to appear. They moved through the school systematically, documenting everything. A janitor's uniform in the supply closet, a cafeteria worker's apron near the serving line, dozens of student outfits in the gymnasium, arranged in clusters as if the kids had been gathered there for some kind of assembly. And there, covering the entire back wall of the gym, was the message they'd been told about. We are the cure, stretched 15 feet high, painted in what initial tests had confirmed was human blood. But whose blood? If everyone had simply vanished from their clothes, where had the blood come from? Father Reyes stood before the message for a long time, his lips moving in silent prayer. When he finally spoke, he told them this was a declaration of faith, not a threat. Throughout history, apocalyptic movements had emerged during times of crisis. People who believed that the world as they knew it needed to end for something better to begin. The Ascension virus, or whatever had happened here, had offered them that ending. They had embraced it willingly, perhaps even eagerly. Sarah wanted to argue, to insist that people didn't just choose to vanish, that there had to be a biological mechanism, some kind of chemical or pathogen that had caused this. But even as she thought it, she remembered something Marcus had said earlier. His colleague claimed the Siberian villagers had transcended. What if they had? What if whatever happened here wasn't something done to these people, but something they'd done to themselves? They left the school as the sun reached its zenith, the late October light casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. Their suits' internal thermometers registered the outside temperature at 53 degrees Fahrenheit, unseasonably warm for Montana in October. Sarah noted it in her log, though she couldn't shake the feeling that normal meteorological data seemed absurdly inadequate for documenting whatever this was. The residential streets of Millbrook told the same story. House after house of abandoned lives frozen in time. They entered a home on Maple Street and found a family dinner interrupted. 4 sets of clothes around a table, 2 adult-sized, 2 child-sized. The food had rotted, flies swarming over what had once been pot roast and mashed potatoes. A high chair held the tiny outfit of a baby, no more than a year old. Sarah had to step outside, ripping off her helmet despite Marcus's shouted warnings, and vomited into the dead grass of the lawn. She'd seen death before countless times, but this was different. Death left remains, left something to bury, something to mourn. These people hadn't died. They'd simply ceased to exist, and somehow that was infinitely worse. Marcus found her 10 minutes later, sitting on the porch steps, her helmet back in place. He sat beside her without speaking, and for a long moment they just existed in that horrible silence together. Then he told her something he hadn't mentioned in the briefing. The Siberian village wasn't the only previous incident. There had been others, scattered throughout history, documented in medical journals and religious texts and folklore. In 1518, a dancing plague in Strasbourg where people danced until they dropped dead, except the bodies had never been found. In 1669, an entire abbey in France where 32 nuns simultaneously fell into comas and woke up speaking a language no one recognized before vanishing 3 days later. In 1908, Tunguska, where the official story blamed a meteor impact, but local shamans had reported entire nomadic tribes disappearing in the nights following the explosion. The pattern was always the same: a community under stress, some kind of catalyst, and then mass disappearance. What if the Ascension virus wasn't really a virus at all? What if it was something older, something that had always been part of human consciousness, waiting for the right conditions to activate? What if Millbrook hadn't been infected, but awakened? Father Reyes interrupted them over the comm system, his voice tight with barely controlled fear, telling them they needed to come to the church immediately. that he'd found something they had to see. They found him in the basement of St. Catherine's Catholic Church, standing before a wall covered in writing. Not the blood-red paint of the school gymnasium, but careful handwriting, thousands of words scrawled in pen and marker and what looked like charcoal. Testimonies. That's what Father Reyes called them. The final words of Millbrook's residents. Sarah began reading, her light beam tracking across the cramped text, and with each sentence, her understanding of what had happened here fundamentally shifted. The testimonies started 3 months before the disappearance, dated entries like a collective journal. July 15th. Something feels different today. I woke up and the light seemed strange, like I was seeing colors I'd never noticed before. My wife says I'm imagining things, but I swear the world looks more vivid, more real than it ever has. July 22nd. More of us are feeling it now. At church on Sunday, Father Reyes asked if anyone else had experienced unusual sensations. Nearly half the congregation raised their hands. We're all seeing the same things, feeling the same presence. It's like there's something just beyond the edge of perception, waiting. August 3rd. The dreams have started. We're all having them every single night. We walk through a world made of light, where our bodies are just suggestions, where we can move and think and be in ways that physical flesh never allowed. When we wake up, reality feels like the dream, and the dreams feel like reality. Some people are scared. Others are euphoric. I don't know what I am. August 18th. Dr. Morrison called a town meeting. He's been researching our symptoms, trying to find a medical explanation. He thinks it might be something in the water, or maybe a gas leak from the old mine. But we all know it's not that. This isn't poison. This is transformation. Whatever is happening to us, it's happening to all of us together. We're changing, and I don't think we can stop it even if we wanted to. September 1st. The children understand better than the adults. They say we're becoming what we were always meant to be. They say that human bodies are just cocoons, and something is trying to hatch. The school nurse tried to call the CDC, but her phone wouldn't work. None of our phones work anymore when we try to call outside. It's like Millbrook exists in its own bubble now, separate from the rest of the world. September 20th. We held a vote today. Should we try to leave? Should we contact the government and report what's happening? Should we resist this transformation or embrace it? The vote was 6,247 to 1,953 in favor of staying, in favor of seeing this through, whatever this is. Those who wanted to leave, they tried. They got in their cars and drove toward the highway, but something stopped them. They said they could feel the edge of town like a physical barrier, a wall made of light that their minds couldn't cross. So they came back. We're all in this together now. October 1st. The first person ascended last night, Tom Brenner, the mechanic who'd lived here for 40 years. He was sitting in his shop and his wife watched it happen. She said his body started to glow, just slightly at first, like he'd swallowed the sun. Then the light grew brighter and brighter until she had to close her eyes. When she opened them again, he was gone. His clothes were there, his wedding ring, his watch. But Tom was gone. She wasn't sad. She said she could still feel him, not in the room, but somewhere close, somewhere better. She said he was trying to tell her it was beautiful, that she shouldn't be afraid. October 7th. It's happening faster now. 3 more people ascended yesterday, 5 more today. We gather in the gymnasium to watch, to bear witness. It's the most beautiful and terrifying thing I've ever seen. Their bodies don't disappear all at once. First, they become translucent, like you can see the light inside them. Then they start to fade, piece by piece, atom by atom, until only the light remains. And then even the light fades, and they're gone to somewhere we can't follow. Not yet. October 11th. Most of us are ready now. We've said our goodbyes to the world we're leaving behind. Father Reyes has been helping people write their final messages, documenting what's happening so that someone might understand. The government will come eventually. They'll find this place empty and they'll be terrified. They'll call it a disaster, a tragedy, but they're wrong. This is a gift. Whatever we're becoming, wherever we're going, it's what humanity was always meant for. We were never supposed to stay trapped in these bodies of flesh and bone. We were meant to transcend. The final entry was dated October 12th, 2:30 a.m. It's time. All of us together. We're gathering in the gymnasium just like we planned. We're going to ascend as one, as a community. the way we've lived our whole lives. To whoever finds this, we're not dead. We're more alive than we've ever been. We're just alive in a way you can't perceive yet. Don't mourn us, don't fear what happened here, and whatever you do, don't try to stop it. The transformation is spreading, has always been spreading. Millbrook is just the beginning. You'll feel it too, eventually. The light at the edge of your vision. The dreams that feel more real than waking. The sense that your body is a prison you're finally learning to escape. When it comes for you, don't fight it. Let yourself become what you were always meant to be. We'll be waiting for you on the other side. Sarah stepped back from the wall, her mind reeling. This wasn't a disease. This wasn't a weapon. This was a mass delusion that had somehow manifested into physical reality, or a physical reality that looked like mass delusion. 8,000 people had convinced themselves they could transcend their bodies, and then they had. Marcus was already hypothesizing, his scientific mind trying to force this into a framework it could understand. He talked about mass hysteria, about the power of belief to affect biology, about quantum consciousness theories and the observer effect. Maybe, he suggested, human consciousness had more control over physical reality than they'd ever imagined. Maybe if enough people believed something, strongly enough, collectively enough, they could actually change the fundamental nature of their existence. Father Reyes had a different interpretation, speaking of miracles and transformation, of God offering humanity a glimpse of what lay beyond death. Perhaps, he said, this was divine intervention, the next stage of human evolution, guided by a higher power. Perhaps the Ascension virus wasn't a virus at all, but a gift. Sarah couldn't accept either explanation, but she also couldn't deny what she'd read, what she'd seen. The evidence was overwhelming. An entire town had believed themselves into non-existence, had found some mechanism, biological or metaphysical or something in between, to shed their physical forms. And according to that final message, Millbrook was just the beginning. They spent the next 4 hours collecting every sample they could, documenting every testimony, every abandoned piece of evidence. Sarah's scientific training demanded data, demanded proof, even as her rational mind screamed that none of this was possible. As they prepared to leave the church, Father Reyes noticed something they'd missed in their initial survey. In the corner of the basement, partially hidden behind boxes of old hymnals, was a door. A heavy wooden door with 3 deadbolt locks, all of them engaged from the outside. The door shouldn't have been locked from the outside. That detail alone sent ice down Sarah's spine. If the residents of Millbrook had all willingly ascended, all chosen this transformation together, why would they lock someone in? Marcus had to use a crowbar from the church's maintenance closet to break through. The wood splintered with a sound that echoed through the empty basement, and when the door finally swung open, they were hit with a smell that their hazmat suits couldn't quite filter out. Decay. Not the rot of abandoned food or the mustiness of a sealed room. This was biological decay. Human decay. The room beyond was tiny, barely larger than a closet, with no windows and a single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The light was still on, casting harsh shadows across the scene. A pile of clothes lay crumpled in the center of the floor, but unlike all the others they'd found, these weren't empty. There was a body inside them, or what remained of one. Father Reyes began praying in Spanish, his voice shaking. Marcus pulled out his equipment, his hands moving on autopilot even as his face had gone pale behind his helmet. Sarah forced herself to step closer, to look at what they'd found. The corpse was in an advanced state of decomposition, at least 2 weeks old by her estimation. Male, probably in his 40s, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. His hands were torn and bloody, fingernails broken from clawing at the door. His face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror, but it was what was written on the walls that made Sarah's blood run cold. The same words, over and over again, scratched into the plaster with fingernails and what looked like blood. Don't listen, don't believe, it's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie. Marcus's voice came through the comm, clinical despite the horror. This changes everything. This man didn't ascend. He was left behind. He tried to resist, and they locked him down here. Sarah examined the body more closely, forcing herself into the role of medical examiner, pushing aside the horror to focus on facts. The man's wrists showed ligature marks. He'd been restrained before being locked in this room. His throat was raw, vocal cords likely shredded from screaming. He died of dehydration, probably 5 or 6 days after being imprisoned, which meant he'd been alive when the others ascended. He'd been forced to listen to the town above him disappearing one by one, while he remained trapped and alone. Father Reyes found a wallet in the man's back pocket. The ID identified him as James Carver, age 43, resident of 242 Oak Street, a teacher at the high school. Sarah remembered seeing that address on their route. They'd passed right by his house, had probably walked past his family's abandoned clothes. She pulled out her tablet, accessing the testimonies they'd photographed from the church wall. There, August 18th. Dr. Morrison called a town meeting. He's been researching our symptoms, trying to find a medical explanation. James Carver stood up and said we were being deceived, that we needed to evacuate immediately, that this wasn't transformation but destruction. People shouted him down. Some called him a coward. His own wife told him to sit down and be quiet. September 5th. James Carver won't stop trying to convince people to leave. He's going door to door, begging families to take their children and run. He says he can feel something wrong in the air, something predatory. Today, someone spray-painted "traitor" across his front door. His son hasn't spoken to him in 2 weeks. September 30th. The council met tonight to discuss the James Carver problem. He's become increasingly erratic, standing on street corners and shouting warnings, trying to barricade his family inside his house. His wife left him yesterday, took their son to stay with her sister. James showed up at the church tonight with a hunting rifle, saying he'd shoot anyone who tried to ascend. Father Reyes talked him down, but something has to be done. He's a danger to the community, to the process. October 10th. James Carver has been secured, for his own safety and ours. Some think we should have let him leave, but he knows too much. If he reached the outside world, they'd come for us before we're ready. He'll be cared for. He'll be kept safe. And when it's all over, when we've all transformed, someone will find him and let him out. He'll see then that we were right. He'll see what we've become and regret his fear. They'd lied, or they'd forgotten. In the euphoria of their mass ascension, in the collective rush toward transformation, they'd left James Carver to die alone in the dark, his warnings proven horribly wrong or horribly right, depending on how you interpreted what had happened. Marcus finished his examination of the body, collecting samples with grim efficiency. He confirmed what Sarah had suspected. James Carver showed no signs of the same symptoms the testimonies described. No reports of unusual visions, no mentions in his diary, which they found in his pocket, of dreams or transformations. He'd been immune, or resistant, or simply unwilling to believe, and his immunity had killed him. Sarah's comm crackled with the voice of the commanding officer from base camp. Team Alpha, this is base. You need to begin extraction procedures. You have 18 hours until the controlled burn. Confirm status. Before Marcus could respond, Father Reyes held up a hand. He'd found something else in James Carver's diary, a final entry dated October 11th, written in increasingly erratic handwriting. They don't understand what they're inviting in. I've been researching, using my phone while I still had battery. The Siberian village, the French abbey, Tunguska. There are older stories too, buried in folklore. Entire tribes of indigenous peoples that vanished overnight. Villages in medieval Europe that were found empty after plagues. Ancient cities abandoned without explanation. This has happened before, again and again throughout history. But it's not evolution. It's not transcendence. It's harvest. Something is taking them, using their belief as a doorway. They think they're ascending, but they're being consumed, translated into something else somewhere else. And whatever is doing this is getting stronger. The events are getting bigger, more frequent. Millbrook won't be the last. It's spreading and no one is trying to stop it because the victims go willingly, joyfully, thinking they're being saved when they're really being devoured. I can hear them upstairs, gathering in the gymnasium. I can hear them singing. My God, they're singing. And I can feel it too now, even though I've tried so hard to resist. The pull, the light, the promise of something better. But I know it's a lie. I know it's a lie. I know it's a lie. If anyone finds this, you have to understand. The virus isn't biological. It's mimetic. It spreads through belief, through shared delusion. And the more people who believe, the stronger it becomes. Millbrook believed together. And so they fell together. You can't fight it with medicine or quarantine. You can only fight it by refusing to believe, by holding on to reality no matter how much the light promises, by staying human even when humanity feels like a prison. Don't let them make Millbrook disappear from the records. Don't let them pretend this never happened, because it will happen again. It's probably already happening somewhere else right now. And next time, it might be a city. The next time after that, maybe a whole state. If you're reading this, hold on to yourself. Hold on to what's real. And whatever you do, don't listen to the dreams. The three of them stood in silence, the weight of James Carver's final words settling over them like a shroud. Sarah's mind raced through the implications, trying to reconcile what she'd learned with everything she thought she knew about disease, consciousness, and reality itself. They extracted James Carver's body with careful reverence, the only physical remains they would take from Millbrook. Marcus had collected dozens of samples from clothes, buildings, and air, but Sarah suspected they'd find nothing. Whatever had happened here operated beyond the microscope's reach. As they loaded the body bag into their transport container, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about those final words. Mimetic virus, an infection of belief. The concept wasn't entirely new to epidemiology. She'd read papers about how ideas could spread like diseases, following similar patterns of transmission and infection. But those were metaphors, academic exercises. This was something different. This was belief made manifest, delusion crystallized into physical disappearance. They had 6 hours before they needed to evacuate. 6 hours before Millbrook would be reduced to ash and buried under the official story of a chemical spill. Sarah made a decision. They needed to find James Carver's house, needed to see if he'd left any other research behind, if he'd been right. If this was going to happen again, they needed to understand it better. The house at 242 Oak Street looked like every other home on the block. Halloween decorations hung from the porch, a jack-o'-lantern rotting on the steps. Inside, the evidence of James Carver's desperate research covered every wall. He'd turned his home office into a command center, tracking incidents across history with the obsessive detail of a man trying to prove he wasn't insane. Maps covered with red pins, timelines stretching back centuries, printouts of academic papers en masse, hysteria, quantum consciousness, and religious ecstasy. And at the center of it all, a bulletin board with a single question, written in large letters. What happens to them? Beneath the question, James had organized his findings into categories: historical disappearances, similarity of symptoms, patterns of spread, and most chillingly, predictions. According to his calculations, events were accelerating. The time between incidents was decreasing. Millbrook was the largest event yet, but it wouldn't hold that record for long. He'd identified several communities worldwide that were showing early signs: increased reports of shared dreams, unusual light sensitivity, people describing feelings of transcendence or presence, small towns in Indonesia, rural areas in Scotland, an isolated community in the mountains of Peru. James had tried to warn them. He'd sent emails to the CDC, to the WHO, to anyone who might listen. The sent folder on his computer, still powered by the house's generator, showed dozens of messages, all flagged as spam or ignored. One response from a CDC official dismissed his concerns as speculative paranoia without empirical foundation. That official was probably among those who'd given the order to burn Millbrook. Father Reyes found James's personal journal in the bedroom, a different one from the diary they'd found on his body. This one was older, starting 2 years before the events in Millbrook. It detailed James's own history, and what Sarah read there changed her understanding of everything once again. James Carver hadn't been immune to the ascension virus. He'd been exposed to it before, during a teaching fellowship in Siberia, in the same village that Marcus's colleague had investigated. James had been there when it happened. He'd felt the pull, the light, the overwhelming desire to surrender to the transformation. But he'd resisted. He'd fled the village the night before the mass disappearance, driving through a blizzard until he collapsed at a checkpoint 50 miles away. The Russian authorities had held him for 3 days, questioning him about what he'd seen. He'd told them everything, and they'd laughed at him, called him delusional, suggested he'd had a psychotic break brought on by carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heater. They'd released him with a warning to seek psychiatric help. But James had known the truth. He'd felt the virus in his mind, had understood its nature in a way that observation alone couldn't convey. It wasn't trying to destroy humanity. It was offering an escape, a way out of the prison of physical existence. And for most people, once they felt that offer, they couldn't refuse it. It was too beautiful, too seductive, too much like everything they'd ever secretly wanted. James had moved to Millbrook to escape the memory, to bury himself in a small town where nothing ever happened. But the virus had found him again. Or perhaps he'd never really escaped it at all. Perhaps it had been inside him the whole time, dormant, waiting. When it began spreading through Millbrook, he'd recognized the symptoms immediately, and he'd fought it, knowing that his resistance might be the only thing standing between his town and oblivion. He'd lost. Sarah photographed every page, every map, every piece of research. This was evidence that couldn't be allowed to burn with the rest of Millbrook. James Carver had spent the last months of his life trying to understand what was happening, and his work might be the only key to stopping it from happening again. Marcus called them back to the first floor, his voice urgent. He'd been analyzing the samples while they explored, running preliminary tests with his portable equipment. What he'd found was impossible, and yet it was there in the data, undeniable. Every sample contained the same anomaly, a quantum signature that shouldn't exist in biological material. At the subatomic level, the clothes, the air, even the dust in Millbrook showed signs of quantum entanglement, particles existing in multiple states simultaneously. It was as if reality itself had become uncertain here, as if the act of mass belief had caused the wave function of an entire town to collapse into a different state of existence. Marcus tried to explain it in terms Sarah could understand. Consciousness, he said, might be a quantum phenomenon. The brain wasn't just a biological computer, but a quantum processor, with neurons existing in superposition until observed. Normally, the surrounding environment caused rapid decoherence, forcing the brain into a single, definite state. That's what we called reality.